Hello all, and now welcome back to my channel. This is now episode 3. So on this episode, I do want to discuss, I think it's an important subject, especially in the current climate. It's about toxic masculinity. I did want to discuss this is because I've been seeing more cases coming up with, especially what's going on in the media and social media. It's in regard to sexual assault cases and even, cases of physical abuse. And I think it's about time that we collectively, especially men, have this conversation, a healthy conversation in a way that allows us to grow and mature. Because what we're seeing a lot is that we're creating a cycle of men, and we're producing this. I think it to me is a vicious cycle of men that think that these things can be acceptable. And even I just saw a few days ago, a YouTuber basically had sex with a minor, and even that was an eye opener for me to bring up this subject. So first, I do want to go off and basically give a definition of what Urban Dictionary defines toxic masculinity as. It states a set of attitudes and ways of behaving stereotypically associated with or expected of men, regarding as having a negative impact on men and on society as a whole. I think it's as us as a society now, we do have to sit down and have this uncomfortable conversation, especially with men, and the grand scheme of things. I think it's important that we have to have this talk, because now it's coming in the forefront of these allegations and these cases that men. I've even seen from firsthand experiences of even, I'm going to give also my opinion on this situation here of all these current cases coming up. But you do see how men undervalue women, how they we state that we want equality as well, but at the same time you do see this toxic conversation that that we shouldn't have equality, but we don't really come out in the open or the public to say these things. So I want to talk to you about my experiences with it, because I do remember even from my Latin household to past friendships and groups I was part of, you do see these things firsthand, and it's very concealed in a way that it doesn't really it doesn't get exposed enough, because that creates this new cycle of men that what creates basically the same cycle of men that we can look at women as in a way that we don't truly value them. And I think it's us that we have to have this eye-opening experience to really value the opposite sex in these cases, right? So I think growing up in a Latin household, I did see it's those concepts of working hard, being the breadwinner, not showing of course not showing sensitivity, not trying to be vulnerable. That was for me a situation where I was completely not aware of, and later on, and now in my life of 35 years old, I do see that that cycle of men that don't want to be vulnerable, that don't want to expose themselves, it creates a new wave of men that who have been impacted mentally, of course, or even physically. And then also with these cases of sexual assault and having sex with minors and stuff, it comes from our experiences of witnessing, either maybe seeing this in the former time of how it was accepted in that generation, that older generation, and how we have to now move on to have that conversation, how this is unacceptable. This is not a place for it to to be allowed anymore, because we will never come out and say it that it was allowed back then. It was more, I guess society didn't look at it in a way that it was negative or wrong to say. So I think as men, even coming from that experience of objectifying women, we I in this conversation sometimes with men, even my father, sometimes I tell him, oh, I'm dating somebody new, and the first question is, oh, how does she look? And it's never what's her personality type. And these conversations even happen with friends, right? The first thing we ask for is how does she look, what's her appearance? And it's never a conversation of who is this person? What is how does her soul look like? And those are very deep questions as well. But I think we have to, really have these conversations that, how we have objectified women, how we undervalued them in society, right? And now, I'm not going to say that, we're not progressing as a society. I think now that these situations are coming to light, we are witnessing more of, this conversation having that, how was this accepted before? How did we allow it to go on for so long? And but in the cases of, those times, men had more power in the media, in workplaces, in politics. It was always that, that they had that position to control, of course, the narrative of life and society. So I think we do have to have that conversation, because even within my culture, like the Latin culture, if I go back home to El Salvador, you do see the cases of men, they either have, they're dating a minor, they're either, like in a promiscuous relationship outside their marriage, and you do see how that trickles down to the next generation and that next cycle of things. And I think it creates these same patterns of men that I find to be, unfortunately despicable, and it's absurd and abnormal how, we don't collectively talk about this. Like I don't see a lot of men sitting down, with cases of James Franco or Shia LaBeouf. Like you see these guys who, physically abused or even talked with a minor, they saw it as something so normal, and we don't even sit down and be like, how could you even, from that part of your brain to look at this as a case of normality. So I think it is important to, have those conversations based on, through either the previous generations of your fathers, or of your grandparents, your great grandparents. Like you can witness those times and see that, it truly was never working, but it was allowed in that time of society, right? So I think we do have to, have that conversation. And because the next thing is discussing, about how even the media or social media portrays what it means to be, this masculine man, this alpha type, that I think now it's created a toxic narrative on men. And we listen to this because sometimes, as young boys, we don't have the proper guidance, either through our father figures, who unfortunately are maybe the reserve type, the quiet types, the ones who are mechanics, the construction workers, or the ones that go to work. And and I applaud those men, of course. I'm never gonna say anything bad about, especially my father, who came to this country, who worked his ass off, and who very much provided. And my mother as well, she worked very hard, and she provided for 3 kids, and that was, a difficult time for them. And especially, you have no time to even deal with your emotions. But I remember also witnessing my father, and I'm like, as a kid, I was like, oh, that's a true man right there. That's this masculine man in alpha, to say, right? But I think what we're seeing in the media is, how we as men shouldn't come together and express emotions, right? We shouldn't express what we witnessed through other trauma or our past experiences of even growing up in a time where, there was toxic conversations that we had as men. Because I think what we discuss, I'm not even sitting here, being this holy person that, I never objectified women, because in my previous videos I did mention I was in long-term relationships, and in those long-term relationships I really valued these women I was in. But as soon as I left those relationships, or they ended, I remember I was just being like, okay, who can I have sex with next? What's the next number? How can I increase my body count? And I remember, now reflecting on those years, I truly wasn't, mature enough, obviously, but I don't want to deny that, or I don't want to justify my actions as well, because, nobody sat with me and discussed with me that it is not a great place to objectify people, especially women, right, in these cases. And there's no man that's going to have that conversation with you that, you should have, these conversations with women about substance, about appreciation of them, of their value here in the society. Because what made me aware basically is I started reflecting on my mother, on my sister, and my grandmother especially, and how they're all so strong people. How they've had these kids, and my sister doesn't have any kids, but how they push through and their resiliency in society, especially when it knocks them down. And especially now that you see in the media of these cases happening now, that women must be scared for their lives in these cases of just how it comes out now. And but at the same time, there is some, I guess, appreciation of it coming out, because now we're being aware of, holy, like crap, this is actually real and it's happening. And now men are just being like, okay, we can't hide anymore, and now this can't be acceptable, and it shouldn't be acceptable, because that conversation of masculinity and these alpha conversations, I don't think are the right conversations, for us to grow as men, or the right, way to we should be maturing, because it doesn't instill, this appreciation for women. It kind of just pushes us. I think it suppresses us more in ways, especially emotionally. But we then, still don't. I guess we don't see the true valuation of women. So I think that's what for me defines a man, is first off being able to express himself, saying to his friend, his brother, I love you, of course. And also let's have that conversation of the past generations, of how they treated women, mistreated them, because that then creates a new wave, and it produces these different type of men who no longer will mistreat women and abuse women in these forms in society. And I think it is about time that we have these conversations, because it's now just, it's being exposed more. And I do find the whole thing disgusting in my eyes, because it's just not, I don't know, it's not the way I see men continuing. And we do have to break these cycles, right? And the second thing is, it's how, I mean, the third thing, sorry, is how it affects our mental health at the end of the day, as men especially, because how we're taught basically is not to really discuss or be vocal about our emotions, or about processing, about being sensitive and vulnerable. There's so many cases of depression and suicide within men, and anxiety, of course, that we kind of don't sit down with each other. We don't express what we've experienced through our time of pressure, of even through trauma. Those cases, we suppress them. We cope with drinking, with drugs, with anything that allows us to not talk. And I don't recall, even in my life, having a real good sit down with another guy. That I think that's why I did have more in my past female friends, because it allowed me to expose myself and be vulnerable without feeling any judgment. Because with men, like I said, that toxic masculinity, you show any form of weakness, it gives, like, it just shoots you down as a man. It undervalues you in society in a way. And I think that's not the correct way to move, because I think it's just, it doesn't allow you for growth. It doesn't allow growth basically in men. And I think at the end, it creates a pattern for us that if we don't talk about it, because we see it through our fathers, right? Like I don't recall a time I've ever sat down with my own father about his past experiences, of what he experienced, his mother being very stern and not providing enough emotional love. And it's an uncomfortable conversation for him. But now I look at myself and I say, how can I grow from that? How can I see myself expressing to even my kids, or even my nephews, or even anyone, I guess, to uplift in that next generation? Even this is why I'm on here giving this content to that next generation of 14 and a 21-year-old, a 30-year-old, whatever it could be, as a man, to have that that conversation with each other, because that conversation doesn't happen for us. It really doesn't. I wish in schools it's taught more that, you can, of course, there's mental health, crisis lines and suicide hotlines, and but we're afraid to do that. We're really afraid to, call up a number like that and discuss our own emotions, because we're so afraid of how society looks at us as a weakness in us, and we don't really find any line of support. Of course, if you have your partner, I think that's one true beauty in all this. Like I mentioned, I had my mother who was my, growing up, she was my support line. Like as a kid, whenever I got sick or whenever I cried from a heartbreak or even my anxiety, she was always there. And I remember reflecting so much on that, if I didn't have that person, I don't know who I would be today. I would be programmed a little differently. I find I'd be colder, I'd be closed off, I'd be reserved. I wouldn't be as open even to doing something like this and discussing this subject, because I think we're a society of men that, we become closed off because of the fear of showing any weaknesses. So it does, affect our mental health at the end of the day, because it's then just gonna trickle down to your future. And like I said, you pass this on to your offspring, and it's not going to be a healthy way for us to keep growing as men, maturing in a way. So my opinion on what a true man should look like this is not also the perfect like guidance or perfect opinion, I guess, to say about how a man should be in this current society. But now with these cases coming up, I think we have to look at these subjects, these topics, also how it affects us emotionally as men, because now when we're seeing these cases, we should be asking ourselves, why are we allowing this to happen? Why aren't we sitting down with these certain cases that come up, and how was it accepted at those particular times in life, right? Because sadly, these men, I first off, I think any man that like in these cases deserve all the consequences. Sometimes people complain about cancel culture and all that, but I think they should, there should be some justice as well, right? Because they committed these acts, they caused trauma on these women, and it then passes on to, these women are not gonna feel normal or trustworthy of any man at that point. So I think that's important to have as with each other, because I've only had, like, even with my brother, there's certain instances of us hugging each other, of us expressing how we feel about some pain, and even a friend I used to have, that we could express to each other how much love we have for each other. And he went through depression, and I go through the anxiety, and I could spill him how I overthink, and he can spills about his past and how it affects his present and his future, and how it can affect his future in the long run, right? So it is that vulnerability that I find to be, to me, what a man should be is being able to express himself in however he wants to, express his emotions, allowing him to, process these things that we go through this life, and these current pressures on us. But I just don't think that we do that enough. But if we could collectively sit with each other and say these things to each other, and show sensitivity without any judgment, without looking at each other as a form of weakness, I think that's how I can view what a man should look like and how he should act in especially in these cases, right? Because it will ultimately affect the next generation, because there's a song by Dua Lipa that says boys will be boys, and I remember even listening to that song, and it's funny how that next generation needs to learn that we just can't allow these boys to just act this way because they're just boys. We have to actually sit with them and be like, hey, listen, that's unacceptable. That is not going to allow you to grow. And also, these women are then not going to have this sense of trust with each other, with men, especially now that it's happening more and more. So I think it is important to talk about it because I know it happens with us men in our conversations. Like we have ugly conversations. I remember growing up, like we would always be like, oh, how many people have you slept with? Like, what's the next number for you? Like, are you gonna get our number? Like, there's even shows like that you see that go on in current culture and reality TVs. That I remember an old show called Keys to the VIP. You see how, these men. It's like a competition of how many numbers you can get, and that, like, I remember just even that was like, even growing up being like, oh man, no, I gotta strive for that. That's a true man right there, having that charisma, that riz, as you say. But I think it needs to change completely, right? And even what you see with these shows called Too Hot to Handle or The Love Island, like, I'm not saying some people are not there for love, of course, but you see how these men act like, they're trying to compete with each other, not trying to, trying to shoot each other down, and just for like this like, what I think they look at women sometimes as objects in those shows, which I think a new conversation does need to happen regarding these cases, because we do have, growing up, we do have a lot of ugly conversations within men that it needs to change, like, completely, because what happens is that then it pushes on to, not, like I said, not valuing women. You go to a party, you have alcohol involved or drugs, you somehow, you see this woman as an object, and what happens with you? You commit these cases of sexual assault and whatever, and with a minor as well. Like, you don't grow in entirely as a man. So I think we do have to, have these conversations and let go of those past, that past, I guess, the past of what was accepted in society, because then it will further us to grow. We'll build a good trusting conversation with women again. And I think ultimately that is the best thing that we should be doing now as a society. So if you ever do, like, look at your mother, look at your, the women in your life, and see how much value you put on them. Like, grow that value, and even, I sometimes want to just say, I apologize for the way that men act, especially how things are coming up now in the public, because it's now looking down in a case that men are perverted, are perversive, are despicable, and there's no good men out there that we can truly trust, because they always have a history or a past. And I think it is important for us to be open with each other, have that open and honest conversation of how our past used to be, and how we would have these negative conversations that didn't allow us to grow. And I think it also stems from, like I mentioned, that history of the men in our lives, seeing how that society allowed it at those times. It does trickle down to us. So, I'll always try to discuss these things, I think, with each other, and in regards to vulnerability and being open with each other. I think that's a time for us to also be able to sit down with each other and discuss what really is happening under us, from a subconscious level as well. Because, I think for me personally, when I see the next generation, I hope they can be a generation that allows them to be open and have conversations. Because we have to have uncomfortable talks in life. I think that's what truly makes us human here, is to have those conversations about our emotions, about our, being sensitive, and allowing us to expose ourselves in a way that allows us to grow as a society and as men. So I think we all need to do that with each other. I think that's important in these cases. And that's why I wanted to discuss toxic masculinity. It really, I think more and more with these cases coming up, it has been affecting me in a way that I just see it's an ugly form of us, becoming toxic and becoming, something that I just completely see unacceptable. So I hope, this can, I hope this hits the general public, of course, but I do hope this hits, certain men that want to listen and actually have this conversation, because this will build a better future for us. And I think it's important for us to sit down and have those conversations. So yeah, if you guys like this topic and what I discussed, you can always comment, subscribe, of course. But I hope we all listen to each other at the end of the day. I hope we all do listen to each other, and we can do this to improve our mental health, to improve society as a whole, and allow us to have those conversations. So please go out there, have those conversations, uncomfortable as it is. It's important for us. So appreciate you listening. All right, have a good day. Bye.